graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves, take it to the top one time non-stop.
Hello and welcome to PhD Hard Talk. Thank you so much, Heather, for your time. Could you please introduce yourself, your research, and what you're currently doing?
Well, my name is Dr. Heather Haley. That's still something I'm getting used to. I received my PhD 2 months ago from Auburn University, and presently I am actually unemployed while I am waiting for my paperwork to work for the Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington, D.C. to go through. So I will be a historian for the United States Navy, which is really exciting.
That is amazing. Oh my God, congratulations. That is
Thank you.
Impeccable. And that, oh, well.
Thank you. I'm excited and nervous.
Yeah, are you going to move then to Chicago from where you are?
It'll be in DC ultimately, but I'm hoping that I can use kind of COVID into my favor, and they'll let me finish my lease here in Auburn, so I won't have to break my lease. But hopefully in July or August, I'll actually be moving up to Washington, D.C. And then I'll be working on the Navy Yard-ish in DC Central, which is really exciting.
Oh, I just got some geography. You see, I lost you there, and I've just figured it out. So at home, just pretend with me. I realized what I've done there, but I'm still.
Well, there is a Navy base, I guess you could call it, outside of Chicago. So you're okay.
That's okay. Thank you for saving me. Thank you. So, in terms of your paper, then your research paper, could you please just introduce the title, and then we'll take it from there in terms of questions.
Sure. So my dissertation, and hopefully the first manuscript, I'm working on my book proposal presently in my spare time, is called Unsuitable and Incompatible, Ensign Vernon Copy Berg, Bisexuality and the Cold War U.S. Navy.
Okay. So are you looking at it from current situation, or are you looking at it from history?
Yeah, so because I'm a historian, I do my best to not bring the present into it until I pretty much get to the epilogue. And this is in terms of the research that I'm doing with Berg. I'm talking about the mid-1970s, when the rights of American citizens are generally expanding as a result of the civil rights movement from the decade previous and all of the advancements made by people of color. And so from that movement comes gay liberation, comes women's liberation here in the United States. And through that, there were a couple of gentlemen in both the Navy and the Air Force who said, well, you're discriminating against homosexuals. That was the term used at the time, so please forgive me for using it. And homosexuals was a very broad term that covered well, I say broad now, it's a very ABC kind of jumble, but at the time it was really just lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, and the term they used at the time was transsexual. Of course, there were certainly asexuals and all of the rest at the time as well, but they certainly weren't comfortable enough to be out and proud as Harvey Milk was in the 1970s at being a gay man. So these gentlemen, I'm looking at, I like using visuals, so here we go. This is Leonard Matlovich from the United States Air Force, who started everything. And then from there, the gentleman that I'm looking at that no one's really looked at in depth before is this gentleman. I'm going to go real close here.
Okay, I can see him.
Yeah, they both decided to initiate what is called an administrative discharge hearing, which essentially means that it's an internal trial. So they're going through military legalese essentially.
Yeah.
And both of them were unsuccessful in remaining open and in the military. And so they both sued each branch of the military. And so, but what I'm essentially looking at is that internal investigation, because this is also a time in American history during the Cold War when Americans were hyper aware of like the security state. And I can only imagine, since this is this PhD Hardtalk is distributed so widely, I can only imagine how others across the globe experience the security state, right? So with CCTV and things of that nature. And so even though these rights are expanding, there is this moment when the military had the opportunity to change their policies, but they doubled down and they didn't. And that's what I'm focusing on in particular for my research.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. How does that benefit current situ in terms of anybody that's in the army? How does your research reach that crowd?
So, and that's something that I've been talking a lot with book editors about, is this is research from a generally, I want to be very careful about how I say this, from a generally underprivileged, especially in this era in the 1970s, when gay liberation is really pushing for the rights, even at the local level in municipalities, so that way they are not discriminated against, so that way they could, you know, attempt to rent apartments. Like they could be discriminated against because they were gay or lesbian or transgender, simply because they existed. And so it is an ongoing struggle, because even though this is something that happened almost 45 years ago, almost 50 years ago, this is a history that not only needs to be shared, but is part of that struggle, is part of, it also could engage people in understanding ways that they could use the legal system to make changes as well. So this was the predecessor to what in the United States ended up becoming Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the 1990s. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that. If you're not, essentially it was a policy in which homosexuality was no longer asked as a question when you went in to enlist. It was no longer a question. For decades, it was a question. Are you a homosexual? Broad term. And of course, most of the time, everyone said no, because the military was a way at the time to ascend the kind of social and economic classes, right, in America. You could ultimately make the military a career. And so it was a way for people to get out of poverty if they wanted to. These two gentlemen didn't have to deal with that. They both kind of came from middle class families. But for others, especially people of color, and potentially, you know, hiding their homosexuality, this was an opportunity that they could use to, you know, send money back to their families, perhaps, or even bring their entire family out of poverty. And so claiming that you were not a homosexual, even though they might have been, was part of this history that I think is a little bit glossed over, especially when we talk about World War II, going into Korea and things of that nature.
Now, I think it's quite interesting the fact that you've mentioned also in terms of poverty, because we know why some people are even doing a PhD, is to escape poverty. Do you understand? To break that cycle. So I believe that it's quite important, the fact that you've looked at it from both aspects, to say this is the reason why one would choose not to and sacrifice what, you know, who they are, to ensure that the family was better. So in current situation then, are you writing for policy writers? Whom are you writing for? Because we know that the history is important, even in current situation. And I think now we have the LGBTQ plus in it. And then the other side, there's like
IAA, there's a lot.
There's so much, and I'm so sorry if I've got that wrong. But in terms of that, how does that help those individuals in current situation, do you think they'll be able to speak out more, or do they still fear? Because poverty in the US is still a thing. In the sense of Obama tried, Trump tried. I mean, I don't know much about politics, don't come for me, but I knew that but they did mention to say that poverty is currently in the US, it is a problem that needs to be fixed. So where do you think you know, what's going on there?
So in relation to my work, there's something in LGBT studies that's called bi-erasure, in which bisexuality is kind of glossed over. We look at the extremes, right? We look at gay men, lesbians, transgenders, and transgender folks, excuse me, but there's a tendency to kind of gloss over bisexuals. And Berg himself, the gentleman I'm focusing on in the Navy, identified himself as a bisexual man. And that is also a term that kind of changes over time as well, because in the 1970s, I get the sense, at least from Berg, that his bisexuality was a result of his previous experiences with women, while at the time of his administrative discharge hearing and then ultimately taking it to federal court, he remained a gay man for the rest of his life. But he had identified himself as bisexual through the lens of the experiences that he had. And so I feel as though that is an important thing to mention as well. So when I talk about bisexuality in the title of my manuscript, I want to make sure that I bring that out there, that bisexuals did exist, and they were part of this kind of LGBT diaspora, excuse me. And if you could forgive me, would you repeat the question? Because I have a tendency to go off on tangents.
Yeah, I think we can press rewind. No, I was saying basically that, you know, current situation and past, we know that poverty can make you or enhance your decision making. So if in the past we can see that to break the poverty cycle, people joined the army and they did not disclose whom they were. In current situation, if we were to focus at current situation, do you think that's still going ahead? Because we know that there's high levels of unemployment and some people are still in a poverty cycle and they want to break out. What's your take on that? Not focusing on the past, but looking at them.
Sure. So the manuscript is written in such a way that I do want it to be accessible not only to national security policymakers, because there's a little bit for them in there, certainly for the community itself, is of utmost importance to me. I want this book to be accessible. For anyone who is interested, there's a really great book by Eric Cervini, and his is certainly written towards what we would probably call a public audience, as opposed to just straight academics, right? But in terms of, you know, because again, like I mentioned before, I'm a historian, I like to kind of focus things into the past, but in the epilogue, I'm making a concerted effort. I'm not writing a conclusion, I'm writing an epilogue because I want to make a concerted effort to ensure that this book is digestible to current readers and people of the community. So not only do they see themselves in history and see their struggle and the efforts that men who even are white, both of these men are white, are making these, I definitely wouldn't call them sacrifices, but they are making a concerted effort to include everyone as part of the military. And I can say with a degree of certainty that that is no longer a question that they ask here in the United States when you enter. So that, unfortunately, we also live in a world that's not black and white, right? So as presidents change, policies change, right? Because when Trump was in office, he refused to allow transgender service members to exist in the military. And that is a policy that has since changed, which kind of brings up issues of, well, how long is this going to last? How can we make this a permanent change? And so that's what I'm also hoping my work does as well. I do find some degree of activism in my work as well. So
thank you very much for your response. So going back then to your research, your findings, did you identify which groups specifically refused because they felt like it was a huge risk to declare at the time, you know, when they were allowed to then declare, or did that not come up in your research?
That is something really difficult to quantify, because there's another really great book I would recommend by Margot Canaday called The Straight State, which talks about, it was the book that influenced me to kind of go down this path. And she talks about America as a welfare state, which we don't think of now because that's just, Reagan changed everything. Yeah. But during the Great Depression, everything was completely different. And her book talks about welfare and homosexuality in particular when talking about women in the army during World War II and then immediately following, which was a really interesting period when when the army in particular is trying to get women out of the military so that way they can free up those jobs for men and bring women back home, right? And so one of the ways that Canaday identifies this is through kicking women out by identifying homosexuality. And these are just minuscule ways that the government, or just even in the eyes of a superior officer, would see, two women holding hands. Or kissing each other on the cheek, which is a very European thing to do, or let alone sitting on a bed together just gossiping. Things of that nature could get women kicked out. But because these individuals kept their identity secret, like I said before, it's really hard to quantify how many homosexuals, their term, were in the military at the time. And in 1955, the United States Navy actually conducts a secret investigation, and they estimate somewhere in these crazy numbers that they're estimating somewhere, I want to say, if my memory is fallible, somewhere between 10 and 25,000 homosexuals in the military, they're estimating. So they know they're there. But again, because of the great possibility of bringing, themselves out of poverty, having a steady job, especially all of this is happening during or right after the Great Depression, is incredibly, and even in the 1970s when I'm talking, that's only 35 years removed-ish from the Great Depression. So that's still fresh in the next generation's mind, is having a steady job and so forth. So lots going on here.
It's quite interesting. So in terms of your research then, what is your chosen methodology and why?
So my methodology, I am an oral historian. I do love oral histories. But in terms of this, it's primarily centered just in Berg's personal papers, which are located at the New York Public Library. And he also has the only copy of the transcript of his discharge hearing. So the military has a file, which they were very generous to give me through what we call a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request here in America, which anyone in the world, by the way, can file a FOIA. So if there's something in America that you want that is currently either redacted or classified, submit a FOIA request. It might take forever, but I definitely recommend you try. But thankfully his papers were just sitting at the New York Public Library, and bless those lovely librarians and research assistants there. They did tell me that no one had looked at his papers as far as they could tell from a historical perspective.
Oh, wow.
So I really got lucky on this project. And so it's focused essentially on some oral histories through the, oh goodness, my brain. I need some more coffee.
I can drink for you, it's all right.
Right. There's a federal oral history project that focuses in particular on our service members and veterans. And then it was essentially Berg's papers and then Leonard Matlevich's papers, which are in the San Francisco Public Library, or the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco. So, and COVID has thrown everything for a loop too. So if you're doing a research project, whether it's a master's thesis, a dissertation, I know those are swapped in Europe, or even if you're doing just a huge research paper, just really befriend those archivists out there. Bless all of the archivists out there who've helped me with this project in the middle of COVID.
Literally. No, I think they've been amazing with all of us for all of our research. You know, scanning paperwork is a long process for some of my work anyway. So I think we have to thank everybody that's helped us to continue with our research and, you know, to work on it without having to struggle so much, or, you know, videos, etc. So I think they've done amazing.
Yeah,
literally.
Absolutely.
So I agree with you, because they've been a really huge helping hand. So, you know, in terms of, I'm understanding that it's history, and I understand that the word that you've chosen for your title is bisexuality. So current situation, if I'm reading that, my understanding of bisexuality is that you can be with one gender or the other gender, it's fine. That's the reality. But based on what you said, is that he had challenges with his previous partners and therefore then became fully well, I don't know if gay is the right word to use.
Right.
And he became gay. So would you say, from a psychological perspective, that the trauma and his milestones influenced his choice, not because he was actually gay, but because he found comfort in that situation, and therefore that became his new title to say, well, I can't call it a title, can I? But this is research purposes, I'm making this up, so don't come for me. But it became a new title from, you know, bisexual to then being fully gay, because now I've got a movement and I need to push this movement. And for people to understand who I am, I can't be in both worlds. I have to be in one. And the one that I need to be in is to be gay and stand firm.
That's interesting. And this is another one of the reasons why I love PhD Talk, is because these are wonderful ways that we can, you know, expand our inquiries and how we can kind of further each other's understanding of what we know of our research, right? So in terms of Berg and his bisexuality and the way he understands it, because this is a very personal experience, right? Regardless of who it is, right? So Harvey Milk, the very first out politician in San Francisco. I used to have a picture of him on my wall because he was a wonderful human. He actually just got his first a ship was just named after him as well, which is really exciting. He was kicked out of the Navy for being gay, and that was not revealed until his documents were released by the National Archive here in America. So but all of that is to say that bisexuality is a very internal, personal experience, right? So for Berg in the 1970s, he understood it to mean that I had, speaking as Berg, I had sexual experiences with women previously in my life. Whether he did not admit or did not reveal that he had recent, and by recent I mean within the last, while he was in the Navy, did not admit to having sexual relations with women. But he admitted that he had a sexual relationship with his male partner. His name is Lawrence Gibson. Both men, by the way, are deceased now. They both, Berg died of AIDS in 1999, which also talks another, this could be a series of books. There's just so much to talk about.
Yeah.
So much to talk about. Actually, and Matlovich died of AIDS as well in, I want to say the early 90s. Anywho, all of this is to say that bisexuality, as we understand it today in 2022, is a person who identifies as bisexual, identifies themselves as attracted to someone who is who has male genitalia and female genitalia, perhaps. And then there's also, when we talk about the IAA plus, there are pansexuals who, like everybody, regardless of your genitalia or identity, non-binary, things of that nature. So hopefully that gives a little bit of understanding there. But your commentary about whether this was, you know, a decision he had to make in relation to his discharge hearing is really interesting, and not one that I had considered, which is why I think these things are great. I don't, based on the evidence that I have, I don't think that's what he was doing. I think he truly was engaged in male M to M relationships, as we kind of talk about it in sociology in terms of gender studies, but I don't think he was purposely going the route you described, but I had not considered it, and now I want to ruminate on that a little bit.
You know, for example, subconsciously you don't realize that you're making certain decisions because you've started a movement, and therefore you feel, you know, not pressured, but you feel, you know, I've finally found a place where I belong. I'm accepted. I have the respect, the dignity. So therefore, to ensure that everybody, and I'm comfortable and I'm content, so therefore to ensure that the message is shared with everybody, I will stay in this position, because if I fluctuate, it will influence how people receive me. And you know how people are in terms of perception. Perception's a beautiful thing, but sometimes it can be confusing. So therefore, I'm just thinking from that perspective, you know, to say, have you considered that from a psychological perspective?
No, I hadn't, and that's fascinating. The one thing I can say, is definitively, as the research is explaining it to me, is that Matlovich, the Air Force gentleman, he was 100%, the title of Time magazine, I am a homosexual. He identifies as a gay man.
As a gay.
And he was doing this with the express purpose of attempting to change policy to be a huge kind of the what I would call the GI of gay liberation. He wanted to be the face of the changes that would be made in policy, whereas Berg, the gentleman that I'm focusing on, he's doing it purely because he ends up going broke trying to sue the United States Navy so he can serve openly. So this is another piece of the kind of socioeconomic discussion that we're having with this, is that not only could the military bring you up out of poverty, it can also, when you're kicked out, throw you into poverty, which happens I'm getting goosebumps talking about this. But that's what happens with Berg, and in, like I mentioned earlier, Eric Cervini's work, that happens with another gentleman whose name is escaping me, but he worked for the federal government and was caught and was found out. And he was ultimately, he ended up becoming the part of the gay liberation movement. So that way he could the federal government would change their policies, because while the military is part of American government, it's kind of its own animal. So his name will come to me when this is all over, and it's going to bother me. But yeah, so many wonderful things.
I've got a question, because what was their age group at the time when they began to push forth with their?
That's a fantastic question, and the reason I say that is because generally when we think of gay liberation in the 1970s, we think of also women's liberation with Gloria Steinem, and then feminism with Angela Davis and her beautiful afro. I'm just getting into some Black feminism right now because I need to decolonize my very white feminist literature. And man, she's amazing. But all of these people, you're bringing up a really great point, that all of these people are, maybe in their 30s or 40s at the latest. They're really young. But I noticed in Berg's papers that there are a bunch of photos of his friends who are in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s, who are members of the LGBTQIA+ community. And while they may not see themselves in terms of their age, they see themselves in the movement with these young people fighting for them. And so I think that's a really great aspect to think about, is ageism in terms of these movements. Because pardon me, a decade before, we're talking about in the United States, we're talking about Martin Luther King, and we're talking about Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks is depicted as this older, I say older, she's fantastic, and she's quite young when her mugshot is taken, but they make her look older. Specifically so that way she kind of looks old and miserly and wise, but she's really quite young and had been involved with the NAACP for quite a while by the time she was arrested. But then we get into gay liberation, and these are all super young, anti-war, mostly anti-war protesters who are also fighting against Phyllis Schlafly, who's a part of the women's anti-women's liberation movement. And so all of that is to say, you bring up a great question about age, and these are generally going to be younger folks. Although that is not to say that there aren't older queer, using that as a broad term now, queer people in the Navy or the Air Force or in the Army in the 1970s that could be targeted and have to hide themselves. Could you imagine hiding your personality, who you are, for 40 plus years? Like, that just, anyway.
It's quite heartbreaking, and I guess that's why I asked the question of age, to bring it to current day, because I'm thinking of the audience, and I'm thinking of somebody who's in a country whereby they can't come out and say, this is who I am, and this is my belief, and I've known this since I was this age. And therefore they're set there. I believe that your paper, your research, it will help them to understand that it's been a struggle, even in the Western world. It hasn't been an easy walk. We may have it on movie, on TV and movies, etc. But that, again, on its own, it's taken a long, long time. And even certain TV shows, if they've got too much, people write in and complain. According to them, it's too much. And what is too much anyway? How do you measure that? What's the KPI?
Right.
But
and who does the measuring?
Who does the measurement?
Yeah.
But you still have that, and there's so many religious beliefs as well globally. There's so many religions, and they again come in with key frameworks in which you can function. So hence why I'm asking these questions, because I'm looking at the relevance in current day.
Sure.
Based on history, and some of them, they are in the army, they join the Navy just to escape, but they can't say because of poverty. You know, imagine if you're from a village in Malaysia and you're trying to get everybody out. That's just an example, by the way. Or in India, you're trying to come out again. So it's quite difficult. So that's why I'm asking, you know, just to help those individuals out there, just to put your mind at ease. Wonderful. So next half is questions that I've been receiving from our colleagues, or some people are just bored at home. There's nothing wrong with you're bored too. So in terms of, you know, journal articles, do you believe, in your honest opinion, that we should be judged by how many articles that we publish?
Oh man. This is the hard talk, isn't it? So of course this is all my own opinion. And I can only speak to my own discipline, right? I know that in the hard sciences, it's absolutely publish or perish, right? And I can't believe how many advances this hard sciences make, just blows my mind. In history in particular, publishing articles in particular is a struggle. I have been, I would say, lucky enough to have some published currently. I started when I was just wrapping up my undergraduate degree, and I had my first article published in Small Wars Journal. And now I actually look back on that publication, and I'm kind of a little ashamed about the conclusion that I came to, just because I was naive and young, and you know, didn't have access to the archives that I wish I had access to looking back on it, right? But now in the era of COVID, this, like we kind of mentioned before we started recording, the whole hustle culture, I really feel has amped up, at least in history in particular, this idea that, oh, we have time to be, you know, publishing and teaching and doing our own research for the next 2 or 3 book projects. And then let's also not, you know, I personally, I'm married, I have a cat who's hiding in a room right now, but I don't have children. And so let's also consider, I think there are a lot of factors that need to be considered in that, is including, you know, not that it should have any bearing one way or the other, but you know, if a person decides to have a family, like, you should probably consider that when you're, you know, considering someone for a position, for example, that you know, oh well, this is all happening in the prime of our lives, right? And so there's a lot to take in. So yeah,
I like your response. So do you feel do you feel fulfilled when you publish an article?
Oh man. So again, the first article I published, at the time when I remember waking up, and it was a Saturday morning, and I got the email saying, oh, it's up on our site. And I like ran to my parents' computer, because I was living with my parents at the time. No shame in, you know, if you have to live with your parents for a little bit. And so I ran into my parents' office and loaded up the computer and saw it, and like, I will never forget the feeling. And if I could say one thing to young publishers, or those being published, is to really savor that moment, because you won't experience it the same way again. It's really exciting, don't get me wrong, but the very first time it happens is just like, you glow for like a week. So it feels great because it's all of your hard work, right? So yeah, I definitely savor that moment.
I love that. So I guess the next question is, my PhD, no, my supervisor for my PhD has advised his friend, who's meant to basically offer me a postdoc, not to hire me or to take me on. What should I do?
So if I'm understanding, I want to make sure I get this right. so person A and has friend.
Yeah.
So and friend has been offered an unpaid postdoc.
No. So basically, the supervisor, the person's supervisor or PI has spoken to his friend off the record.
Okay.
The student that they look after has applied for the postdoc. They've told their friend to say, don't take that student on. So what should that student do? Because it's gone back to the student.
So again, I want to make sure I got this right. I'm a little slow. I need more coffee. So if I'm understanding this right, this person wants to work with this professor.
Yeah.
But the other external person is like, no, you shouldn't do it. Is that what I'm getting at? Or is it the other?
Okay, so we'll do it like this, right? So you're my supervisor.
Okay.
Yeah. And you've worked with me for 4 years, and I'm now applying for postdoc positions, right? And we'll say my dog is your friend, as my supervisor.
Okay.
And you tell my dog, don't take that student on. Noma is just an absolute arse. You can't work with her. And well, I'm exaggerating now.
I know, but yes.
But literally you influence them off the record. So the student is now asking, what should I do? Because it went back to the student.
Oh man, internal drama. Okay. So I am lucky that I've never had to have that kind of conversation. And I empathize with anyone who has to go through something like that. In theory, the mentor and the mentee at this point should be colleagues, right? In theory, right? And so if the student, the recent student, feels comfortable enough to address it, absolutely. There is I've never thought about it from this perspective before, but at our university, if this were happening like on our campus and things of that nature, there is somebody called an I'm gonna get this wrong, ombudsman, who kind of serves as an arbitrator for these kinds of situations, and it makes it super formal, and I feel like these kinds of conversations shouldn't be formal. But if it gets to that, I would absolutely recommend going that route. But also, in theory, these should also be, this former student should have a committee, right? So if the leader of this committee is in some way influenced one way or negatively, hopefully there's someone else that they can fall back on. Where they can get a letter of recommendation, and or maybe have kind of an insider perspective who could also influence that committee member to perhaps see the error of their ways, and things like that. So that's a tough one. I'm lucky I've never had to experience that, and I feel for anyone who does, because
sucks, isn't it?
Yeah. Gosh.
So I guess that the next question is, do you think it's better to self-fund or get a scholarship for your research?
I went to Texas State University for my master's, and I had to self-fund, which means that I am drowning in student loan debt here in America. So, and that's another thing that we don't really talk about post-degree, right? Is how much, at least in the United States.
It's global. Don't worry about it. It is a global thing. Like, we
Yeah.
owe money. We don't know how we're going to pay it back. I mean, that's the story for me and my therapist, but yeah.
Yeah, same. It is certainly something that keeps you awake at night, that you know, my husband and I don't, for a long time, we thought that we just weren't going to be able to buy a home. So if Joe Biden, you're watching this, like, pay attention, please.
Hello.
But so I had to self-fund that. I applied to 8 programs, got into 1, and all you need is 1.
Yes,
I
that's
know
all
people,
you need.
you need 1. I know that there are the responses are coming out right now for applications. So again, all you need is 1, y'all. And I was lucky enough to get in pre-pandemic, because I know the pandemic is throwing off budgets all over the US. Some programs are dropping their history departments like altogether, which blows my mind. But you really have to sit and weigh the goal. So I follow you a lot, Noma, and you talk a lot in your TikToks about, you know, I just want to. Well, for me, I wanted to collect all 3, honestly. I wanted the bachelor's, I wanted the master's, I wanted the Ph.D. So I wanted to collect
it all.
So like it's a Pokemon card or something. But yeah,
the pictures after. That's all.
Yeah, right. Like with the fancy hat, and you guys have beautiful regalia. Meanwhile, we have our polyester whatever going on here. But yeah, I truly wanted to collect all 3. I plagiarized in high school, and so part of me was like, I wanted to prove myself that I wouldn't do that again, and here we are. In history in particular, this is not a discipline where a lot of money is made, and so you really have to weigh, you know. I did take out student loans to kind of pay for things while I was here in Alabama. So again, I'm drowning, but I do think it was worth it in the end. But when I get my first bill in June, I will probably reconsider that.
I feel like it's daylight robbery every time student finance deducts. This is me to use student finance. I just feel robbed.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
You mentioned scholarships earlier, and I have to say, yes, like even if you're taking out some student loans, like apply for everything, because it goes on your CV, right? Yeah. And some of those, like I got the document that I sent you was for the Virginia Military Institute, which is all of the awards that they had given previously were for straight military history things. So I didn't think that they were going to give money to somebody who was talking about LGBTQ issues, and ta-da! They decided to give me some money, and that's really nice. And that was at the start of the pandemic, and they were like, "Oh, if you need to use it to pay your rent, that's okay." And so it's, yeah, if there's a piece of advice that I would give is to apply for any scholarship you can apply for. Even if they say no, it's time well spent.
Yeah. I guess the next question, you might agree, you might not. Do you think that going down the route of, you know, how I say, you know, in your words, I want it all, it does break the poverty cycle? Or now you can't tell the difference? I mean, we've just talked student loans. So
you're also asking me this at a point in my life where I'm literally unemployed. So currently, no. But I hate using the word blessed because in America it's overused. But I am happy that I got a job straight out of my degree. I am not sitting here taking on 5 different adjuncting positions to try to make ends meet, right? And I'm going to be going into a job that is going to take me up a couple of tax brackets, which is kind of nice. I don't think it will solve all my problems, but like I mentioned earlier, the research I do is also kind of a little form of activism, you know, which, you know, makes the Tucker Carlsons of the world very, very upset. But I do find that I am making a significant contribution that will outlive me, and that is important to me. So I find it worth it. Yeah.
Thank you. This is the last question. You'll be glad to know. So, do you,
my cat will be glad to know.
Do you think PhD Hard Talk is benefiting researchers from a global perspective, universities as well, and also I haven't finished my question.
I know you haven't, but yes. Please finish your question. Yes, universities.
The prep for the final oral viva presentation, do you think it's working, or do you think no more pack up, that's it, be done, log off, jobs are good?
Again, life is not two extremes, right? But I would have to lean more towards the yes, this is fantastic, continue doing this extreme. Just the diversity of not only faces, sexualities, personalities. You had an Appalachian queer pagan, and I was like,
Pendergraft, the guy.
Yes. This is an opportunity for people across the globe, and I hope you understand how global this is, and you probably experience that with the people that you talk to. But this is often, as a historian of American history, this is a moment for me to see and hear people from South America, from Africa, from deep, you know, in India, that I would never have that opportunity to experience, with the exception of a 3-minute TikTok, right? Which is probably highly curated, right? And whereas here, we're just kind of shooting the shit, right? We're just, that's it. And I love it. I absolutely, and they give the greatest advice. Someone was talking about when you go to a conference and you see like you fangirl, you have a fangirl moment or a fanboy moment. Like, the only thing I would say is have that moment. And then be professional. But yeah, like they would love it if you just said, oh my God, I'm totally a fan, and then become professional. Right? But like, there's so much great advice, and you cover so many disciplines. And I love it. I absolutely say keep it. And it's necessary in 2022. And sometimes we, you know, it's a form of therapy, which is more therapy on you that you don't need. But sometimes we need to talk, and we need this human companionship, and to know we're not alone. And I think that's the biggest part.
No, thank you so much. That was like a very meaty response. I didn't expect that, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess we've come to the end. You'll be glad today. So hashtag Project Dissemination to the World. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And if you do want to contact Dr. Heather, please read the descriptions below and check out the post on LinkedIn. It's got all of her publications, where she's based. But please, if she doesn't respond back within 24 hours, she's not being a bitch. No. We're busy so much. So please be patient with us. We do respond, but sometimes it gets really hectic, and sometimes we just need therapy. That's what it is. It's not you, it's just a moment in life. So please respect the boundaries, essentially. But thank you again for subscribing, liking, and turning on your notifications. Thank you, Dr. Heather.
Thank you.
Elevated, now it's my time to shine. Yeah, let's go.